Dear children, today also we will learn about the topic nature of matter. In last class we have learned mass density. In this class we learn about pressure. Okay, pressure. What do you mean by pressure? We do one activity. Okay, take a tumbler containing water, place a blade horizontally. It floats. Place the same blade perpendicular to the surface of the water. What happens? Here the blade sinks. Here the blade sinks. In first case, the blade will floats. Why? Because when the blade is placed horizontally, its mass is distributed over area. Okay, over a wider area. Therefore, the mass per unit area is less and it floats. Do you understand, children? In second case, when the blade we kept perpendicular to the water surface, it sinks because mass is distributed over a smaller area. Hence, it is sinks. The force exerted by the water is less here, but here the force exerted by the object is more, so the blade will sinks. Do you understand? When the blade is kept perpendicular to the water surface, it sinks because the mass is distributed over a smaller area, hence it sinks in water. What is pressure? What is pressure? The force exerted on a unit area is called pressure. What is pressure, children? Yes, the force exerted on a unit area is called pressure. The force exerted on a unit area is called pressure. Here one more activity is there. Immerse a stone gently into a glass beaker containing water. What happens here? What happens? Stone will sinks in water. Stone is sinks in water. Next, in second case, immerse a wooden plank into the other beaker containing water. Immerse a wooden plank into the other beaker containing water. Right here, what you have noticed? What you have noticed? Here, wooden plank floats on water. Wooden planks float on water. Here, the stone will sinks in water. Why? Because the object exerted downward force. The object exerted downward force is high. So, the stone will sinks. But in second case, the upward force exerted by the water is more than the object exerted by its force. Okay, upward force is exerted by the water is more, so that the wooden plank floats here. When an object is immersed in water, it exerts a downward force on water, and the water in turn exerts an upward force or upward thrust on the objects. If the upward force exerted on the object is more than the downward force, then the object floats. This upward force exerted is called buoyancy. What we call? Buoyancy. Okay, children. Here, one activity is there. Write names of any 4 objects which float on water. You have observed wooden plank. Wooden plank is float on water. Leaf is also float on water. Next, take one plastic cover and put it on the water. What happens? Plastic cover also floats on water. Next, you take one bird feather and put on the water. What happens? Feather also floats on water. Do you understand, children? Next, here one more activity is there. Fill water in a glass jar as shown in the picture. Then put marble, coin, dried leaf, wooden plank, straw, etc. in the jar. Ask your friends to tell what happens to each object that you have put in water by observing it. Okay. What happens? Some objects they float on water, some objects they sink in water. Okay. You have to write here. Okay. Objects that float in water. Which are the objects float in water? Yes. Dried leaf and wooden plank, straw, feather. These are all floats on water. Objects that sink in water. Which are the objects sink in water? Coin, marble, stone, iron rod. These are all sink in water. Do you understand, children? Why these objects are float in water? Because the force exerted by the object is less. Here, the objects that sink in water, these objects that can exert force exerted by an object is more than the water. So, these objects will sink in water. Children, here one more activity is given. Fill water in 2 glass jars. Take 2 jars and fill water as shown in the picture. Now pour sugar to 1 jar. You have to put sugar in 1 jar and you have to take some charcoal powder and put in another jar and stir it well. What happens? Did the sugar and the charcoal powder dissolve in water? Observe and write here. In first picture, what happens? The sugar will completely dissolve. We can't see any sugar particles. That means sugar dissolves in water. Okay, you have to write here, sugar dissolves in water. But in second jar, what happens to the charcoal powder? Yes, charcoal powder do not dissolve in water. It floats on water, but the charcoal does not dissolve. You have to write, but charcoal does not dissolve in water. In this activity, you have we know that some objects dissolve in water and some objects do not dissolve in water. The objects dissolve in water, this is called solubility. Okay, solubility. Some objects do not dissolve in water, that is called insoluble objects. Insoluble objects. The objects which do not dissolve in water, that is called these are called insoluble objects. So objects that dissolves in water, we call it as soluble objects. You have to do it one more activity. Put the given objects in the water and stir, observe and write what happens to these objects. They are given salt, sand, sugar, kerosene, turmeric powder, sugar candy and coconut oil, milk. You had the same type. You take a glass of water, different glass of water, and you have put one spoon of salt in one glass and sand, then sugar and kerosene, turmeric powder, sugar candy and coconut oil, milk. You have observe carefully. Okay, you have first put salt, then observe what happens. Salt will dissolve in water. We do not see any salt particles in water. Right? Soluble objects in the column. You have to write salt in soluble objects in water. Okay, children. Next, you have put some sand in glass of water. What happens? They do not dissolve in water. Then you have to write here insoluble objects column sand. Okay, children. Next, you have to take sugar 1 spoon and put in water. What happens? Sugar also dissolve in water. You have to write sugar in soluble objects column. Next, take kerosene, 1 spoon of kerosene and put in water. What happens? Kerosene also do not mixes with the water. It separately settles on the water surface. So, you have to write kerosene in insoluble objects column. Next, you take turmeric powder and then you put it in glass of water. What happens? Turmeric powder also do not mixes with water. So you are right in the column insoluble objects. Then sugar candy. You take sugar candy and then you put in glass of water. What happens? It takes some time, but sugar candy almost all full, they dissolve in water. So you are right, the sugar candy in soluble objects column. Next, your test coconut oil. Take 1 spoon of coconut oil and put it in water. Then mix it well. What happens? Then coconut oil also settles on the water separately. Then the coconut oil, you are right in which column? Insoluble objects column. Then you take 1 spoon of milk and put in glass of water, and then what happens? Yes, milk is completely dissolved in water. You write milk in soluble objects in water. Then you think and write some more objects in the column soluble objects and insoluble objects. Okay, dear children. Today this chapter will completed. Thank you, children.